The 1% do not think about money and economics in the same way as the general population. They don't care about hot stock tips. They don't care about inflation in the same way. And they definitely don't get any of their information from the news. They don't care about what Jim Cramer has to say. Instead, they play a completely different game with rules that the system does not want you to know. And when you know these rules, you can use them to your advantage and play the game the same way that the 1% do. Let's go over three things. First, the bond market is way more important than the stock market. You have to think of the stock market as the show, and the bond market is the script. Every serious investor is looking at the bond market because it sets the price of money. It tells us where inflation is going in the future. It tells us what level of risk there is in the system overall. And it also gives us an idea of how global capital is moving all around the world. If you ignore the bond market, you're basically watching a puppet, but ignoring the puppeteer. Second, the headlines are not telling you the truth. The media is not focused on the numbers that actually matter. They're talking about CPI or GDP and the jobs numbers. But the 1% don't care about those numbers. That's all noise. In fact, what they're worried about is the business cycle. They're looking at PCE, not CPI. They're looking at the Fed's balance sheet and not what Jerome Powell is saying on the podium every other month. Finally, most people think of money in terms of savings. How much money can you stash away into your bank account? But the 1% don't just save. They're looking at the fact that the FDIC only insures up to $250,000 in a bank account. They don't want that money sitting in the bank. They need to put that money into investments so that first off, it's not actually losing money in terms of inflation and real growth of their assets. And then lastly, once again, if they're only insured up to 250,000, well, that's peanuts to the 1%. They see money as a tool, not to impress people, but to buy their future freedom. And so when they're looking at what should I do with my money, they're looking at metrics like net present value or discount rates, which are really important metrics that we're going to talk about in this series about macroeconomics. When you start to understand the time value of money, you stop asking how much is this going to cost versus how much is this worth in the future. A lot of these metrics sound complex, and that's not a mistake. Okay. The system is much better off with few people understanding this information. But once you understand how all of this works, you're never going to see the economy the same. This is just the intro. In the next episode, we're going to start breaking down the bond market and why it is exactly that it's so much more important than the stock market. If you've always felt a little bit lost in what's happening in the markets, subscribe to the channel. We're going to dive deep on all of these topics and how you can get a better pulse on what is going on.